Hey folks, welcome back. Check this out. In this video, we're going to make this bomber ass belt pouch, dump pouch, foraging pouch, whatever you want to call it. So if you like it and you want to make one, you might want to stick around. Alright, so I'm going to lead with this. I don't have a pattern. All I have is an idea as to what I want to accomplish in building this. So I'm going to kind of develop the pattern as I go, and hopefully that'll work for people who don't have a pattern, just kind of have a basic idea. It'll kind of show you the thought process that I go through when I'm trying to develop something new without downloading or buying a pattern or anything like that. I've scoured the internet to find all the little bits and pieces that I like, and I'm going to try and put them all together without a pattern. So we'll see what we come up with. So I'm really looking for a piece where I can get 2 sheets of paper in approximately. But I'm just going to mark my corners with my marking pen. Now I'm going to use a nice perfect straight edge. Alright, so there's the first piece. Now what I want to do is I want to add whatever I can get here for the roll. Because of the nature of this kind of leather, even as gently as I cut it without stretching the leather, still don't always come out square. So you just got to kind of manipulate it. It'll all square itself away in the end, but I know that in its natural state they were the same length, so I want to make them the same length even if I have to stretch one out a little bit. Now I'm going to sew this pouch inside out, and then I'm going to turn it right side in so that this is what's showing on the outside. So what I picked was a natural colored sinew, because sometimes when you sew a leather pouch and you flip it the other way, sometimes the threads show through a little bit, and I want them to be roughly the same. I don't want to use a dark thread so that you see an occasional little hash mark showing up. I want to try and get everything to match as well as possible. So on something like this, since it's not too awful thick, you can usually get away with about 5 times the length. So I'm going to go roughly the length. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to add one more just for good measure. And so here's a neat little trick for threading your needle. I mean, truth is, you do what you do to get it through the eye. So you want to take the needle opposite the end, poke it through the string like that. Give the string a little twist in whatever direction it's laying, and poke it through again. So now the needle is going through like that in a little S pattern. So you work these 2 knots down towards the end, so that one's sitting right at the end, and then you pop it. And now your thread is threaded through itself and it won't come off, and you can just handle both ends. Now I have a needle on both ends of my string. So now I've got it laid out inside out, and I'm going to ever so slightly glue the seam with barge cement. And the reason I'm doing this is that I'm going to want to punch some holes in it. I can always just kind of whip stitch it, but I'm going to stitch it a little bit differently. I'm going to saddle stitch it, and I want to punch the holes for that, and I don't want it to slip once I get the holes punched. With barge cement, once you apply it, you let it dry till it gets a little bit tacky, and then you stick it together. I'm going to want to match up my corners very good. Then make everything else kind of stretch a little to fit. And the way to do that is in pieces. So stretch that, make that fit. What I'm doing now is marking the holes. I have to kind of roll and push instead of just rolling like I would on veg stand. If I just push and roll at the same time, instead of doing them as two separate actions, then the leather will stretch. I don't want it stretched out anymore. I want it to stay the same shape. So now I have my pattern. This is my field leather repair kit. It's just a little case I made. Has some sinew. Has my needles and everything. Just one I can carry with me in case I need to do this work. I just put a Dremel chuck in a piece of lace wood and then drove a pin through the guide hole that was in it, and it gives me a real universal awl with a standard drill chuck. So that's what I'll be using. So those holes are punched, but they're not very wide. So I'm going to have to go through and widen each hole, I think, so it lines up right. So I want to go through each side opposite each other. And then bring them to the center. So now I'm on the last stitch, so I'm going to go over and back through on this one. So the stitch goes over the edge. And I'm going to do the same with this needle. Right back through the same hole, and then over the edge. So now the edge is bound, and I'm going to go back and back stitch it about 2 threads. So now it's technically back stitched 3 stitches total. And since this is all going to be on the inside, it doesn't really matter which side I do. I'm going to put one of them back through one more time. The truth is, this is never going to come out, not back stitched 3 times, but I'm going to go ahead and put a square knot in it. So now I've got it stitched up as like a little tube. You see the stitching along there. And I want to turn it inside out, or right side in, just to inspect the stitching from the other side, to see what it looks like. And you see it looks very clean. If I tug on it, and try and pull it apart, none of the stitching shows. There's very little glue showing. Now that I got it all spread and separated, that's where I'm at. I have this sleeve. So I'm going to turn it back inside out again. And now I'm going to find, essentially I'm going to center this line to the middle of it. And I'm going to do the same stitch all the way along the bottom and seal the bottom up. So now I'm going to glue this seam down on the bottom after I get it centered perfectly, or close to perfect. I worked off the wrong end. Damn it. It doesn't really matter, but this end was marked from my roll, which means now I have some pencil I'm going to have to get rid of there. Oops. So I'll stick the center down, make sure my edges are out. And I'll work all the way out to the edge. That way any excess gets pushed out to the edge and glued back into it. If I work from the outside in, I might get a bubble in the middle, and I don't want that. And now I showed you how to mark it and do all that kind of stuff, but I'm not going to bother with marking it on this one. I'm just gonna eyeball the holes. But I do need more thread. We'll cut the thread again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just a little for good measure. Better to have it and not need it. Then I'll thread my needles again. I really didn't have to mark the other one either, but I wanted to show you how to do it. But it's not necessary. The stitch doesn't really show. I mean, you don't want to get too inconsistent with it because it might create little gaps in the finished product, but as long as you're relatively consistent and can follow a straight line or imagine a straight line, then you'll pull it off. It's not a big deal. Remember, I want to make sure that this thread is perfectly centered, or else I'll run out on one needle. And once it's centered, I can just go through and one hole at a time, I can guess the distance. And then stitch it up exactly the same as the other one. So I will get to stitch in, and I will check back with you in just a minute when I get this one all stitched up. Alright, so I just got the bag finished. I stitched it exactly the same as I did this seam. Same stitches and everything. The only difference is when I got to here in the middle, I went ahead and passed the needle right through one of the other holes and back through and back out the other side, so that I didn't have a lump on top of this. So I didn't put a piece of thread over the top of this seam. So now I have to turn it the right way. You'll see a little silver line that was supposed to be at the top. I just didn't pay attention when I glued it. So it really doesn't matter. Dimensionally it's the same. It just means now I have to erase a line. We have kind of a bulge right here. So I'm just going to go to the anvil and smash it down with a hammer. So now I have the top rolled over, and I'm gonna find 2 points left and right of the center so I can punch holes there and put eyelets in. Now you don't have to do eyelets, you can do just 2 holes, or you can do one big hole in the center and bring both strings out the hole in the center. But I'm gonna do 2 holes, put eyelets in them, and then I'm gonna have the strings come through and cross and go out the opposite hole. So I'll find, make sure everything lays flat. And then there's the center. So I'm just going to say right about there, right about there. On Skidmore in the strap, I got one shot at treating it. So now this is a pretty cool little tool. It's a lacing needle, and you just clip the end of the cord into a point and then you thread the needle onto it and it holds on really tight. They make them in different sizes for 550 cord or leather lace or various other different things, but you can check them out online. And I'm inserting it in the opposite eye and then threading it through so that it comes out on the other side in sort of a cross pattern. I figure that just makes it a little bit more tight, since the toggle that I'm going to put on it is a fire steel toggle and it doesn't have a lot of friction. So this will be more like tying your shoe. So now I'm laying out the piece for the hanger or case or whatever you want to call it, and I just want to make sure that it's at least as wide as the bag when the bag's rolled up. And I'm not too worried about the length. I'm going to cut it a little bit too long and then shorten it up as I need to once I can wrap it around the bag itself. You can see it's quite a bit too long, and I'll take a little bit off of that. But I'm still going to leave the closure end a little bit long because I have another little thing I'm going to do with it towards the end. Now I'm just checking the fit, make sure everything's good. This is the hanger. I decided to go with a sort of a triangle shape so I could put a D-ring on the bottom. It was sort of a last minute addition, but I thought it'd be a nice place to either hang some gloves, or if I'm not wearing the bag on my belt, I can hang it on a hook off the side of my pack, so it's handy if I want to put it on my belt, but I don't have to have that cumbersome, that bulk on my belt the whole time. Now I'm just gluing it down with barge cement and seal it down tight. Marking my hole for my rivet, and then I'll punch it. Now these rivets are a little bit long. I don't think they make them short enough for my purposes, but you can cut them off just fine as long as you round the end off so that it fits back in the cap. These cap rivets are actually pretty sturdy, as flimsy as they look, especially when you back them up with some stitching. And you just set the rivet by pressing it or hammering on it. I'll do both in this video so you can see both methods. I'm going to back it up with some stitching. It's not really necessary, but I'm going to do it anyway because I like to overbuild things. And rather than using an awl, I'm using this lacing punch. But you can use the same method as we used to stitch the bag and just punch the holes with an awl and then thread them through. It's not a big deal. I just wanted to show multiple different methods and tools to do it. So now I'm kind of checking the placement. I want to make sure that it's exactly where I want it to ride and where I want it to sit before I secure the belt hanger on the back of the case. I'm just marking out where I'm going to cut the excess off the back of the belt hanger because it gives it a more clean look on the back. It's not that anybody will ever see it, but I like to make sure everything looks nice and clean from all angles. And that seems to be fitting exactly like I wanted it to. I'm going to mark the exact position where it goes so I know where to put the barge cement so I can glue it down before I stitch it. And you don't actually have to stitch it like I'm doing. You can put rivets in it. The rivets are more than strong enough, and it's a lot quicker to do it that way. But like I said, I want to overbuild it a little bit. So now I'll add a little barge cement to both pieces and let them wait a minute till they get dry and tacky, and then I'll secure it and adjust it to make sure that D-ring falls on dead center. Once I'm happy with the placement and the barge cement is dry, I'm going to double check one more time on the wrap and make sure everything comes out the way that I envisioned it. Once again, I'm going to punch these holes with these lacing punches, but you can do it with an awl or you can just put rivets in. Either one will work. Now that the holes are all punched, it's time to get my stitch on. And this stitching takes some time. I'm not showing all the stitching because it is kind of a long process and there's not much to see, but once you get it down and you do a couple of stitches with the saddle stitch, you'll see how simple it really is, and you won't need to see anymore. Once again, I'm going to secure it with a square knot and then burn the ends off. I don't really have to because I've backstitched it 3 stitches, or in this case since I went around in the circle, I overstitched it 3 stitches. And now I'm marking a stitch line around that area. Again, if I waited, I could have put that rivet through both pieces and that would have been enough. But since I jumped the gun and did that first, now I have to stitch the bottom of that down. just kind of one of those things when you develop a pattern. Sometimes you do things a little bit out of order. But either way, it worked out. I punched the holes. Again, you can do this with an awl or with a pickle fork. I like to call them those lacing punches. And in that case, I backstitched it 3. Now I'm marking the corners how it lays flat, and I'm going to roll the bag over and see how much it moves. Because it's going to need a bulge. It's going to need like a space in the back to compensate for the thickness of the bag when the bag's rolled up. So I'll mark the corners once again, and that'll tell me how much it's moved. I think you'd be safe just giving it a good 1/2 inch, but I wanted it to be exact for this bag. And I'm guesstimating where exactly I'm going to put my snaps, because the snaps are going to be the first step in holding the bottom on, and they don't have to be perfectly spaced. Now I'll mark my snap holes. After putting in a piece of a cutting board that I chopped down just for this purpose, I can use a punch to punch the holes, because you can't do it with the rotary punch. You have to use a hammered punch. But you could probably do it with an awl or something else. It's a matter of just using what you got. Essentially, you're just making a hole in leather that a snap post will fit in. Now once I'm happy with the placement of the snaps, then I'll put the case on it, making sure that they're pressed down all the way, and then I can set those snaps. Now I'm just marking the lines to give me some sort of a reference to where to put the rivets on the top that doesn't eliminate the bulge that happens in the bottom, because that bulge needs to be there when the bag is rolled up. Now with those holes punched, I can use them to transfer a mark to the bag itself, so I can punch holes in the bag and then set my rivets. And again, these rivets are obviously too long, but clipping them off and then setting them is perfectly acceptable. It works just fine. Now I'm just setting these with a hammer and a flat piece of steel, because I can't fit it on the press without damaging the front side of the bag. But if I do it this way, there's minimal impact on the front of the bag, and after about a little bit of wear, it won't even be noticeable. At this point, I'm just trimming up the rest of the case around the bottom just to make it more aesthetically pleasing. And I don't want those pointy corners of the leather because in time they will curl up and just be a nuisance, so it's easier just to clip them off. Now I'm using the compass just to mark spacing for the second set of rivets. There's no actual measurement for it. I just want them to be the same on both sides, and they're going to go flat and push all that bulge down below the rivet, between the rivet and the snaps on the bottom, so that all that extra space is down below it. Now it's just like every other point. I just punch the holes and set these rivets. If I fold over the closure flap and press it against the bottom snaps, it'll leave a small indentation and an indicator of where to put the snaps on the closure. So once I marked and punched the holes for the snaps, I'm going to double over the flap to make room to secure a fire steel in there. For one, it'll add weight to the flap so they'll stay down and out of the way, but for two, it's just an extra fire steel. There's already one on the toggle, but it never hurts to have extra. Overkill is still kill. Now I'm just checking to make sure that my hillbilly measurements actually measured up, and it seems like they work pretty good. And now since the fire steel seems to fit, I'm going to trim the front to be aesthetically pleasing as well. And that, as they say, is that. It looks like I pulled off the dump pouch without a pattern. Well folks, thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed that. We made this bomber belt pouch. It's got a fire steel in the flap, fire steel here, super heavy duty deerskin or elk skin leather. A good afternoon's of work. It's going to last forever. It's going to be something my grandkids admire. So if you make one, connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Send me pictures so I can see what you did and what modifications you made. And I appreciate you sticking around. Consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already, and I will see you on the next one.